Hello ladies and gentlemen. For our first really easy video project, we are going to make hair scrunchies. Now, I know a lot of you will be going, oh, I'm too old to wear hair scrunchies, or I've got no use for hair scrunchies, I don't have granddaughters, I don't have anybody to give them to. You can use them for all sorts of other things. I actually use hair scrunchies to keep my interfacings rolled so they don't come unravelled. My grandson has a couple of hair scrunchies done in boys' fabrics that he wraps around his trading cards because hair scrunchies are softer, so they don't crease the sides of the trading cards, whereas elastic bands do. So, you know, you can think of other things. If you're a craft fair person, then they sell really easily because you can make them cheap, because from a fat quarter you can get 4 scrunchies. So, you know, if you're going to use up cheaper fabrics like the likes of Aldi's fat quarters, which I think you get about 5 or 6 for £3.99, you do the math, it doesn't take much to make them. They're very, very quick to make and they sell really well because little girls love them. So what you're going to need, well, I'm going to show you one scrunchie, but you can make 4 from a fat quarter. Each scrunchie will take a piece of fabric that is 4.5 by 22, which is the width of a fat quarter, and a piece of elastic. Now this elastic is 1/2 inch wide. You could use 1/4 inch wide. I like 1/2 inch. Well, that's what I've got, so that's what I'm using. Any wider than 1/2 inch tends to be a bit cumbersome and doesn't actually work very well, so 1/2 inch is the maximum size. And your piece of elastic should be 8.5 inches long, and that's 8.5 inches long. You can make it a little bit shorter if you want to. You can make it a little bit longer if you want to. If you've got very thick hair and you need a much bigger scrunchie, then make the whole thing bigger. But this size works for me. So here's my fat quarter. Fat quarters are generally 18 inches by 22 inches. Some a little bit more, some a little bit less. It depends on the original width of the fabric. Now, if you wanted to, rather than messing about measuring, you can fold the fabric in half and then fold it in half again, which will give you sort of quarter marks, and then you can cut along those quarter marks. I prefer to use my rotary cutter and ruler, and basically what I end up with is a piece of fabric that is 22 inches long by 4.5 inches wide. So that's what I need for my scrunchie. 1 piece of elastic, 1 piece of fabric. So we're going to turn the fabric right sides down. Right sides down meaning that the pretty side of the fabric is on your table. I'm going to take my piece of elastic, grab my pins, and I'm going to position the piece of elastic at one end of my fabric and just pin it in place. And then without twisting the elastic, I'm going to take it to the other end. Now I'm positioning it more or less central. You can see I'm not measuring it. It doesn't matter if it's not perfectly central. You can eyeball this. I'm a good one for eyeballing. I do like to eyeball things. So you can see now my piece of elastic is slung between my fabric, and that's attached on the wrong side of the fabric. So on the side that isn't the pattern side. Now I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to just back stitch across both of those, just do a couple of stitches just to secure it. You can see that the elastic is much shorter than the fabric, and that's how it's meant to be. So I'm going to turn off the video, go over to the machine and start over again. So here we are at the machine, and I'm just going to put a few stitches just to secure that piece of elastic at the end of my scrunchie. I'm going to take the pin out because I don't very often use pins. And I'm just going to pop a couple of stitches through. To hold that elastic in place, and I'm going to get rid of my thread ends because thread ends are the bugbear of my life. I'm going to do exactly the same at the other end. There we are. Now our elastic is attached at both ends. So now we're going to just ignore the fact that we've got elastic on there. We're going to turn our piece of fabric over and we're going to fold it in half, right sides together. So the pretty side is tucked in the middle. And we're just going to match up the long edges. I'm going back to using clips. We just ignore the fact there's any elastic there. Just match them up all the way along the length of the fabric. Now, there's a distinct lack of measuring in this, which is good because I don't like wasting time measuring things, and there really isn't a right or wrong measurement. If you make smaller ones for little children, then you can use much thinner elastic and obviously much less fabric. So you can see I've now folded all of that fabric in half, right sides together, so the pretty side is on the inside, and I've clipped it in place. Now I've put my first clip approximately 2 inches away from the short end. I'm going to do exactly the same at the other end and make sure my clip is about 2 inches. It's an approximation, and I'm going to stitch along that raw edge to secure those two edges together, starting at that 2 inch, about 2 inches in from where I put my clip, so 2 inches from the end, and finishing about 2 inches from the end. It is an about measurement, not an absolute measurement. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance because I think that is quite sufficient for this. Tightening up my stitch a little bit, and I'm just gonna, again, we're ignoring that elastic, just back stitching at the beginning. Try and keep your stitching straight, because then you'll get a nice even ruffle on your scrunchie. I'm using clips because that's what's familiar to me. Use pins if you feel more comfortable with pins. And this is a really great project to do with kids because it is really only straight lines. There's very little stitching actually involved. Coming all the way along. Just be careful you don't stitch over your bit of elastic. Just try and keep that out of the way. To say, I didn't find the most dynamic bit of fabric to do this in. My daughter's got long hair and wears her hair in a scrunchie when she's at work, and she's got them in just about every colour you could imagine. So there we go. I've now stitched all the way along, starting about 2 inches from that end and finishing about 2 inches from the other end. So now we've got what looks like a giant headband. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn this right sides out. So it's quite easy to do. You can kind of poke it with your finger and pull it, and that piece of elastic will suddenly make its way inside your scrunchie. Now, if you want to use some sort of a pokey tool, I used to use a wooden spoon for this. I actually prefer to use my finger. Just pull my finger in, push my finger into the hole and kind of fidget it through. I'm not sure that's a technical sewing term, but it does the trick. I find if I use something to kind of push it through, you end up with a great big bunch of fabric in the middle, and then it won't turn, it won't move. I find this a lot easier just to kind of gradually ease it through with my finger. You notice as you're pulling it through, it's starting to ruffle up where the elastic is inside. That's fine, that's how it's supposed to be. You need to come all the way through until you've got the end out of the other end. So there we go. Now we have, it looks like a scrunchie. Look at that. So smooth out the end here. I'm going to do the same at both ends. Just smooth it out and pop a pin through the elastic and the main fabric. What you're trying to do is stop the scrunchiness going into that end bit. We're going to do exactly the same on the other end. So push the fabric down the elastic. It doesn't matter. It's going to be a scrunchie. It doesn't matter if it's scrunched. That's what it's meant to do. And we're just going to straighten that out, and approximately an inch away from the edge of the fabric, I'm just literally popping a pin through to kind of hold the elastic and the fabric together and to stop the scrunchiness coming up into this end part. So now I'm going to just open up that end and match it with the other short end. So the two bits of elastic will be together. Well, they should be. If you've actually put them centrally, then they will be together. And actually, although I eyeballed that, they are pretty much together. Just goes to show that I'm pretty good at eyeballing. If you prefer to pin, then pin rather than clip. But you're clipping those two end pieces together, right sides together. So you've got the pretty side in the middle and the wrong side of the fabric is showing on the outside. And what we're going to do now is we're going to stitch across that short end. Again, a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I use a 1/4 inch because I don't want too much bulk in these. They get a bit clumpy if you use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I know for a lot of ladies that are garment sewers, 1/2 inch is quite a normal is a normal seam allowance for you guys. As a bag maker, we tend to use 3/8 or a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I find 1/2 inch quite enormous. It's going over the top of that elastic. Make sure that everything is sitting together and straight. It doesn't have to be overly tidy. So I think you can probably see there, I've stitched across that end. That encloses both of the short ends of the elastic. So the elastic is basted at the very edge, but then it's stitched across as well. You can remove those pins. Do remember to remove those pins, otherwise you'll end up with a scrunchie that hurts. And you're nearly there now. If you just give it a little pull, you can see that what you end up with is a cavity where you left those 2-inch gaps at each end. And all I'm going to do is take the edges of that opening, fold them inwards by a 1/4 of an inch, because that's the seam allowance that we used. Try matching up that seam where you joined the two pieces together. Match that seam. You can either pin this or clip it. It's really very much a personal preference thing. As a bag maker, I don't use pins. And then all we're going to do is top stitch very close to the edge to secure that opening closed. If you wanted to hand stitch it, you could do. I don't hand stitch anything if I don't have to. So a couple of back stitches at the beginning just to make sure my stitches are secure. Couple of back stitches at the end to make sure my stitches are secure. Get rid of any threads. It's always useful if you're using a thread that matches the fabric. And there we go, job done. One fabulous scrunchie. And if you're putting that on your ponytail or whatever, you can pop it around twice, and it's just good to go. So I like to use them round rolls of faux leather or things like that to hold bits and pieces together. I find that it doesn't mark my faux leather if I put it around certainly it doesn't mark as much as an elastic band would, or even just a piece of elastic. My grandson, as I say, uses them. He has them around his trading cards because they hold them together without creasing the sides. Apparently that's not good. Not being a trading card person, I don't really understand, but Pokemon cards or whatever they might be. I don't know, I'm far too old for that sort of stuff. But there you go, one scrunchie. Make them in pairs, make them single, use glittery fabrics, use whatever you really want to, and they are so easy to make. And you can see the video hasn't lasted more than 15 minutes, so you get a conveyor belt system going, and you can make them really quickly. I can do these in probably 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes, but I'm not usually talking to a camera at the same time. Scrunchies, yay!